The transport shuttle lurched as it docked with the orbital station, and Thomas Reeves pressed his forehead against the cold viewport, watching the massive structure swallow them whole. 6 months ago, he'd been installing climate control systems in Chicago apartment buildings. Now he was headed to Nexus 7, the galaxy's largest diplomatic hub, to fix their failing environmental processes. The pay was obscene, the contract was 2 years, and his daughter's medical bills would finally be covered. The station's interior was a sensory assault. The air tasted metallic and carried scents he couldn't identify, something like burnt sugar mixed with ozone. Aliens of every conceivable shape moved through the corridors, towering crystalline beings that chimed when they walked, quadrupedal creatures with too many eyes, something that looked like animated water held together by a shimmering membrane. Thomas kept his head down and followed the holographic guide arrows to the maintenance sector. His quarters were Spartan, but functional. The bed adjusted to human proportions after he fumbled with the interface for 10 minutes. He'd just started unpacking when his comm unit chirped. The voice that emerged spoke perfect English with an odd harmonic undertone. Technician Reeves, you are assigned to Sub-Level 43, Environmental Processing Nexus 7. Begin immediately. The Caltherian delegation arrives in 16 hours. Failure is not acceptable. Thomas grabbed his toolbox. The weight was familiar, comforting. Inside were instruments that had been in his family for 3 generations, alongside the standard-issue station equipment. His grandfather had always said that good tools were the only honest things in the universe. Sub-Level 43 was deep in the station's industrial bowels. The corridors here were narrower, darker, maintained for function rather than appearance. Thomas followed his scanner's readings through a maze of pipes and conduits until he found the Nexus chamber. The door was partially open, and from inside came a sound that made him freeze. Someone was crying. Not the angry crying of frustration or the sharp crying of pain. This was the deep, shuddering crying of someone whose world had broken. Thomas hesitated. His contract specified technical work only. Non-interference with station personnel unless directly relevant to his duties. But his daughter used to cry like that before the treatment started working, and some reflexes ran deeper than contracts. He pushed the door open gently. The chamber was vast, filled with the humming machinery that regulated atmosphere for 3 entire sectors. Sitting on the floor between 2 massive pumps was a small figure in what looked like a servant's uniform. She was humanoid, but her skin had a faint lavender hue, and her hair fell in silver-white waves that seemed to move independent of any breeze. Her hands were pressed against her face, and her shoulders shook with each sob. Thomas set down his toolbox carefully. "Hey," he said softly. "You okay?" The crying stopped instantly. She looked up, and he saw that her eyes were enormous, golden with vertical pupils like a cat's. Tear tracks glistened on her cheeks, catching the dim light and refracting it into tiny rainbows. She scrambled to her feet, wiping frantically at her face. "I apologize. I should not be here. I will leave immediately." Her accent was musical, each word perfectly pronounced but somehow foreign in cadence. Thomas held up his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "Wait, hold on. You're not in my way. I just need to check some readings. Are you hurt?" She stared at him with those impossible eyes. "You are human." "Yeah, name's Thomas. I'm the new maintenance tech." He picked up his toolbox and moved toward the nearest control panel, deliberately turning his back to give her space. "You work here on the station?" There was a long silence. Thomas pulled out his scanner and started running diagnostics, giving her time. Finally, she spoke again, her voice steadier. "I am called Lyria. I serve in the household of Ambassador Thelgzaris of Velthara. I was delivering a message to the environmental control supervisor." "Was?" Thomas glanced at her while his scanner mapped the system's heat distribution. "I became lost. These corridors all look the same to me. And then She trailed off. Thomas nodded, eyes on his readouts. "And then whatever was bothering you got too heavy to carry anymore." He heard her breath catch. When she spoke again, there was wonder in her voice. You understand. Everyone's got their breaking point. He frowned at a reading. Huh, that's weird. Your environmental supervisor should have caught this days ago. The pressure differential in conduit 7 is way off spec. Supervisor Chakrath does not concern himself with details. He says such work is beneath his attention. Thomas snorted. Yeah, I've met that type. He pulled out a wrench and started loosening a panel. So, what's got you down? If you don't mind me asking. Sometimes it helps to talk. Lyria moved closer, watching him work with obvious curiosity. You would not understand. It is a matter of Velthari custom and honor. Try me. I've got at least 3 hours of work here, and I'm a good listener. She was quiet for so long he thought she'd decided against it. Then, in a rush, the words spilled out. There is a male in the ambassador's household. He is important, highborn. And I am nothing, less than nothing. I am 7th born of a merchant family that lost its trade routes. We sold ourselves into service to survive. But he speaks to me sometimes, kindly. And her voice dropped to a whisper. I made the mistake of hoping. Thomas pulled out a corroded seal and examined it critically. Let me guess, someone told you to stop hoping. The head of house called me to her chambers this morning. She said I had been seen, that my behavior was inappropriate, that if I did not cease my presumptuous attention, I would be dismissed from service and my family's contract would be voided. They would starve. That's rough. Thomas selected a replacement seal from his kit. And this highborn guy, does he feel the same way? Lyria laughed, but it was hollow. How could he? I am nothing to him. Perhaps I imagined his kindness. Perhaps I saw what I wished to see. Thomas fitted the new seal carefully, tightening it with practiced movements. Or perhaps he does care, but there's politics and rules getting in the way. The powerful always have more chains than the rest of us, just fancier ones. She moved to stand beside him, and he realized she was small, barely reaching his shoulder. You speak of the powerful with no fear. I fix their air conditioning. Without me, they suffocate same as anyone. He grinned at her. There's a freedom in that. They need us more than we need them. They just don't like admitting it. For the first time, Lyria smiled. It transformed her face, chasing away the tear-stained misery. You are strange, Thomas Reeves. So I've been told. He moved to the next panel. Hand me that calibrator, the blue thing with the 3 prongs. She found it and passed it to him, their fingers briefly touching. Hers were cool, slightly damp from her tears. They worked in companionable silence for a while, Thomas explaining what he was doing, Lyria asking surprisingly insightful questions about the systems. How did you learn all this? She asked, as he recalibrated a sensor array. My grandpa taught me. He said machines were honest. They broke for real reasons and fixed for real reasons. No politics, no lies, just cause and effect. Thomas wiped his hands on his coveralls. Turns out that's true whether you're in Chicago or halfway across the galaxy. Chicago, that is on your homeworld. Earth, yeah, big city, lots of noise and weather and people who don't look where they're going. He realized he was smiling. I miss it sometimes, but my daughter needs the money this job pays. You have a child. Lyria's eyes widened. Is she here with you? No, she's back home with her mother. We're not together anymore, but we both love our girl. She's sick, needs expensive treatments. This contract means she gets to grow up healthy. He paused. That's why I understand about family obligations. Sometimes love means making hard choices. Lyria was quiet for a long moment. The male I spoke of, his name is Kale. He is being prepared for a marriage alliance with the Jorani collective. It was arranged before his birth. His entire life has been directed toward this purpose. And he's okay with that? I do not know. He never speaks of it. But sometimes, when he looks at the stars through the observation deck windows, he seems sad. She wrapped her arms around herself. I should not have allowed myself to care. Thomas closed the panel and started gathering his tools. Maybe. Or maybe caring is the only thing that makes any of this bearable. The universe is cold and huge and doesn't give a damn about us. Maybe the only warmth we get is what we make ourselves, even if it hurts sometimes. That is a lonely philosophy. Yeah, but it's honest. Like machines. He smiled at her. For what it's worth, I think this Kale guy would be lucky to have someone who cares about him enough to cry when it's hopeless. That's not nothing, Lyria. That's maybe the most important thing there is. She looked at him with those golden eyes, and he saw something shift in her expression. You are kind, Thomas Reeves. I did not expect kindness here. World's full of surprises. He hefted his toolbox. I need to check the upper junction box, but that reading should stabilize now. You going to be okay? Yes. Thank you. For listening. For understanding. Anytime. He headed for the door, then paused. Hey, Lyria. If you ever need to talk again, I'm usually down here or in Bay 7. Door's always open. Her smile was small but genuine. I will remember. Thomas spent the next 3 days deep in the station's infrastructure, mapping systems that hadn't been properly maintained in years. The previous tech had apparently believed in addressing emergencies only, leaving a backlog of minor issues that were slowly cascading toward major failures. Thomas methodically worked through them, replacing worn components, recalibrating sensors, updating software that was decades out of date. He didn't see Lyria again, though he thought about their conversation more than once. There was something in her quiet sadness that reminded him of himself, years ago when his marriage was falling apart, and he'd realized that love wasn't always enough to hold things together. On the 4th day, he was running a pressure test on a coolant line when his comm chirped. The voice was different this time, deeper, with a resonant quality that made his bones vibrate. Technician Reeves, report to Ambassador Thelgzaris's quarters immediately. You have been requested specifically. Thomas frowned at the comm. They're a problem with their environmental controls. You have been requested. Attendance is not optional. The connection cut. Thomas sighed, wiped the grease from his hands, and headed for the residential sector. The corridors here were dramatically different from the industrial levels. Floors of polished stone that shifted colors under his boots, walls covered in living plants that pulsed with bioluminescent light, air that smelled of flowers he couldn't name. Everything was beautiful, expensive, and completely impractical from a maintenance perspective. The ambassador's quarters took up an entire wing. The door was 3 times Thomas's height, carved from some dark wood-like material and inlaid with precious metals in swirling patterns. He pressed the call button, feeling distinctly out of place in his grease-stained coveralls. The door opened silently. A figure stood in the entrance, and Thomas had to actively stop himself from taking a step back. The Velthari were humanoid, but that's where the similarities ended. This one, the head of house, Thomas assumed from her bearing, stood nearly 7 feet tall, with skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her eyes were the same golden cat slits as Lyria's, but cold, assessing. She wore robes that flowed like liquid metal, and her silver-white hair was bound in intricate braids that floated around her head as if underwater. You are the human technician. It wasn't a question. Her voice carried the same musical quality as Lyria's, but harsh, like beautiful bells struck too hard. Thomas Reeves. Yes, ma'am. Enter. The ambient temperature in the ambassador's meditation chamber has been fluctuating. It is displeasing. Thomas followed her through corridors that seemed designed to make visitors feel small. Every surface was art. Every corner held treasures that probably cost more than his entire neighborhood back home. He kept his eyes on his scanner. Professional detachment, his only armor. The meditation chamber was circular, walls made of something translucent that showed the stars beyond. In the center of the room, a figure stood facing the viewport. Even from behind, Thomas could see the difference. This Velthari moved with absolute certainty, every gesture controlled, every line of his body speaking of power held in check. Kale, the head of house said, and her voice had shifted, become carefully neutral. The technician has arrived. The figure turned, and Thomas understood immediately why Lyria had fallen for him. Kyle was young, maybe 25 in human years, with features that were sharp and elegant, even by Velthari standards. But it was his eyes that caught Thomas. They were the same golden color, but where the head of houses were cold, Kyle's were searching, looking for something he hadn't found. "Thank you, Mireth. You may leave us." The head of house's expression didn't change, but something in her posture went rigid. "My lord, it would not be. I said you may leave." Kyle's voice was soft, but it carried absolute authority. Mireth bowed, shot Thomas a look that promised consequences if he stepped out of line, and withdrew. The door closed behind her with a soft hiss. Thomas cleared his throat. "So, temperature fluctuations?" Kyle smiled, and it was unexpected, genuine, almost mischievous. "There are no temperature fluctuations. I needed to speak with you privately, and calling for the environmental technician seemed the most innocuous method." "Okay." Thomas set down his toolbox slowly. "What's this about?" "Lyria." Thomas felt his stomach drop. "Look, if this is about... You spoke with her 4 days ago in the Environmental Processing Center. She returned different, lighter somehow, more herself than she has been in months." Kyle moved to a low bench and sat, gesturing for Thomas to do the same. "I want to know what you said to her." Thomas remained standing. "With respect, sir, that was a private conversation. I am not asking as her master. I am asking as someone who cares about her well-being." Kyle's face was earnest. "Please, I need to understand." There was something in his voice that decided Thomas. He sat, keeping careful distance between them. "She was upset. I listened. That's all. Mireth said Lyria was seen crying in the maintenance levels, that she disappeared for nearly 3 hours. Mireth wanted to discipline her, but I intervened." Kyle's hands clenched. "I had to phrase it as concern for the household's reputation, but truthfully, I could not bear the thought of Lyria being punished for what? For being human in her emotions." "She's worried," Thomas said carefully. "About overstepping, about causing problems for her family. Because of me." It wasn't a question. "That's between you two." Kyle stood abruptly, pacing to the viewport. Against the backdrop of stars, he looked impossibly alone. "Do you know what it is like, human, to have your entire existence mapped before you draw your first breath? Every day scheduled, every relationship vetted, every word weighed for political implications?" "No," Thomas admitted. "But I know what it's like to have obligations that squeeze the life out of you." "Lyria." Kyle pressed his hand against the transparent wall. "When she looks at me, she sees me. Not the crown prince of Velthara, not a diplomatic asset or a marriage alliance. Just... Kyle, do you have any idea how precious that is?" Thomas thought about his daughter's smile when he came home from work, before the sickness, when she'd run to him just because he was dad. "Yeah, I think I do. I cannot have her." Kyle's voice was flat. "My marriage to the Jirani princess was negotiated by my grandmother before I was born. It secures a military alliance that protects 3 billion Velthari lives. I will not, place my personal desires above my people's survival." "So you're just going to let her go?" "What choice do I have?" Kyle spun to face him, and Thomas saw raw anguish in those golden eyes. "If I pursue her, she will be destroyed. The political forces that would align against her family, they would not simply exile her, they would make an example. And I cannot protect her, not without triggering the exact crisis my marriage is meant to prevent." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you made her smile. In one conversation, you gave her something I have failed to give her in months of careful words and stolen moments. I need..." Kyle's voice broke slightly. "I need you to be her friend, to give her someone she can trust, someone outside the political games, someone who sees her as worth caring about. I'm just a maintenance tech. I'll be gone in 2 years. 2 years is a lifetime when you are drowning. Kyle straightened, and Thomas saw the prince reassemble himself, emotions locked away behind royal training. I am prepared to compensate you handsomely. No. Thomas stood. You don't pay someone to be a friend. That defeats the whole point. Kyle stared at him. Then, you will? If Lyria wants to talk to me, I'll listen. Same as I'd do for anyone. But I'm not doing it for you, and I'm not doing it for pay. I'm doing it because she deserves to have people in her corner who give a damn. Thomas picked up his toolbox. Now, you want me to actually check your environmental systems, or can I get back to work that matters? For a long moment, Kyle just looked at him. Then he laughed, a sound of pure surprise. They said humans were unpredictable. I am beginning to understand why. He moved to the door, triggered it open. Thank you, Thomas Reeves, for your honesty if nothing else. Thomas paused in the doorway. For what it's worth, what you're doing, putting your people first, that takes guts. But don't forget that you're people too. Your happiness matters, even if you don't think it does. He left before Kale could respond, but he felt the prince's eyes on him all the way down the corridor. The station's cycles blurred together. Thomas fell into a rhythm. Work, sleep, eat, repeat. The environmental systems slowly improved under his methodical attention. He started getting nods of recognition from other maintenance workers, mostly non-human species who appreciated competence regardless of origin. Lyria found him again a week after his conversation with Kyle. Thomas was shoulder-deep in a ventilation shaft, replacing filter membranes, when he heard her voice. The supervisor said I might find you here. He extracted himself carefully, wiping his hands. Hey, how have you been? Better. She smiled, but it was tentative. May I speak with you? Of course. Give me a sec to finish this section. He worked while she watched, her presence comfortable rather than intrusive. When he finally climbed down, she handed him a cloth to wipe his face. Thank you. He gestured to a relatively clean section of floor. So, what's on your mind? They sat together, backs against the curved wall of the shaft housing. Lyria was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Kale spoke to you. Thomas kept his face neutral. He mentioned you, yeah. He told me. He said he asked you to be my friend, and you refused to be paid for it. She looked at him with those impossible eyes. Why? Because friendship doesn't work that way. You can't buy caring about someone. But you are busy. You have important work. Why waste time on someone like me? Someone like you? Thomas frowned. Lyria, you're smart, kind, and brave enough to feel things even when it hurts. That's not nothing. That's not someone to waste time on. That's someone worth knowing. She ducked her head, but he saw her smile. You always know what to say. Nah, I just say what I think. It's easier than keeping track of lies. He stretched his legs out. So, things any better with the head of house? Mirith watches me constantly now. Every movement recorded, every conversation noted. But Kale, her voice softened. He has been finding ways to make my duties easier. Small things, ensuring I am assigned to tasks away from Mirith's direct oversight. Leaving books in places he knows I will find them. Books. I love to read, but servants are not permitted to access the household library. Now I find volumes in the linen closets, the supply rooms, always books I mentioned wanting to read during our brief conversations. Her expression was achingly tender. He remembers everything I say. Thomas felt a pang of sympathy for both of them. That's got to be hard, being cared for but not able to act on it. It is torture. The word was quiet but fierce. Sometimes I wish he would stop, that he would ignore me, dismiss me, make it easier to forget. But he is too kind, too good. And she looked away. I am selfish enough to treasure every small gesture, even knowing it leads nowhere. They sat in silence for a while. Then Thomas spoke. My daughter Sophie, she's 8 now. When she got sick, the doctors said she might not make it. And every day I went to that hospital, I knew there was a chance I'd lose her. But I still went, still read to her, still held her hand, still loved her with everything I had. Why? Lyria whispered. If you knew you might lose her, why not protect yourself? Because the alternative was not loving her at all, and a world where I chose fear over love, even painful love, wasn't a world worth living in. He looked at her steadily. Maybe it's the same for you and Kale. Maybe you can't have forever, but you can have now, these moments, and maybe that's enough to make the pain worth it. Tears spilled down her cheeks again, but this time she was smiling through them. How is your daughter now? Getting better. The treatments are working. She'll grow up, probably give me hell as a teenager, maybe have kids of her own someday. The thought made him smile. That's why I'm here, in this ridiculous job, talking to beautiful aliens about love and pain, because she's worth it. Lyria wiped her eyes. She is lucky to have you as a father. I'm lucky to have her as a daughter. He stood, offered her his hand. Come on. I need to check the atmospheric processes in Section 12, and you can keep me company if you want. Tell me about these books Kyle's been leaving you. She took his hand, let him pull her up. There was one about the early days of the Velthari Empire, before the expansion wars. They walked through the station's corridors together, Lyria talking about ancient histories and philosophical texts, Thomas listening and occasionally asking questions. Other station personnel passed them, some watching with curiosity, others with disapproval. Thomas didn't care. Lyria deserved to have someone treat her like she mattered. Politics be damned. What he didn't see was the figure watching from a shadowed alcove, golden eyes tracking their progress with an expression of such longing it would have broken his heart. Kale stood there long after they'd turned the corner, one hand pressed against the wall as if to steady himself. Later that evening, Thomas was in his quarters reviewing the next day's maintenance schedule when his door chimed. He opened it to find a package sitting in the corridor, no sender identification. Inside was a bottle of amber liquid and a note written in elegant script. For your honesty and your kindness. This is Velthari meditation wine, traditionally shared between those who understand the weight of impossible duties. I hope you will accept it in the spirit it is offered, as gratitude from one who carries too much to another who does the same. K. Thomas held the bottle up to the light. The liquid inside seemed to glow faintly, casting warm shadows across his small room. He opened it carefully, poured a small measure into a cup. The smell was incredible. Flowers and starlight, and something that reminded him of his grandfather's workshop on summer mornings. He raised the cup toward the ceiling, toward where he imagined the ambassador's quarters might be. To carrying impossible weight, he murmured, and to finding moments of grace in between. The wine tasted like hope and sorrow mixed together, and it burned going down in the best possible way. 3 weeks into his contract, Thomas was summoned to the station director's office. The message was formal, allowing no room for refusal. He cleaned himself up as best he could, borrowed a less stained coverall from another tech, and made his way to the administrative sector. The director was a Kikshari, one of those crystalline species that chimed when they moved. The sound was actually their method of communication, translated through a device mounted on the desk. The translated voice was gender-neutral and unsettlingly calm. Technician Reeves, your work performance has been exemplary. The environmental systems are operating at 97% efficiency, the highest in 12 years. Thank you, sir. Or ma'am. Or... Thomas trailed off, unsure of Chiksari protocols, a chime that the translator rendered as mild amusement. Your confusion is noted and forgiven. I am neither and both. I have called you here because your name has appeared in several diplomatic reports, specifically reports concerning the Velthari delegation. Thomas felt ice in his stomach. I've done my job, nothing more. Indeed. And yet Ambassador Thelgzaris has personally requested that you be assigned to maintain environmental controls exclusively for the Velthari sectors. Crown Prince Kale has submitted a commendation for your professional conduct, and 3 separate intelligence reports note that you have been seen in regular conversation with a Velthari servant named Lyria. The director's crystalline form shifted, catching the light in new ways. I do not care about interspecies friendships, Technician Reeves. I care about maintaining the delicate political balance that keeps this station functioning. The Velthari are preparing for the most significant marriage alliance in their recent history. The Jorani Collective has made it clear that any disruption to these proceedings would be considered an act of hostility. I'm a maintenance tech having conversations. How is that a disruption? Because the Crown Prince is showing signs of emotional instability. Because the servant in question has become a focus of court speculation. Because the Zorani princess arrived yesterday, and her intelligence officers are already investigating everyone in the prince's orbit. The director leaned forward, crystal facets glinting. I am not telling you to cease your friendship. I am telling you to be aware that you are now a person of interest to powers that could crush you without thought. Thomas absorbed this. Noted. Anything else? Yes. Be careful, Technician Reeves. Kindness is a luxury that those without power can rarely afford. Thomas left the office feeling like he'd been dunked in cold water. The Jorani princess had arrived. The timeline had just accelerated, and Lyria was about to watch the man she loved marry someone else. He found her that evening in their usual meeting spot, a small observation lounge in the lower sectors that most people didn't know existed. She was staring out at the stars, her reflection in the viewport showing tracks of fresh tears. Hey, he said softly. She turned, tried to smile, failed. She arrived today, Princess Zalnara of the Jorani Collective. She is beautiful, Thomas. Perfect for him in every political way. Thomas sat beside her, their shoulders almost touching. You saw her. I was serving refreshments at the official greeting ceremony. I had to watch him bow to her, had to watch her take his hand, had to listen to the crowd celebrating their union. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook. And the worst part? He looked at me, just for a moment, and I saw that he was dying inside too. Lyria, I know what you will say, that this was always how it would end, that I knew from the beginning. And you are right, but knowing and feeling are different things. She pressed her hand against the viewport. How do you bear it, Thomas? Loving someone and knowing you cannot have them. You don't bear it. You just survive it. One day at a time. One breath at a time. He was quiet for a moment. My ex-wife, Sophie's mum, we still love each other in a way. But we couldn't make it work. Different wants, different needs. And sometimes I see her with her new partner, and it hurts. But I'm also glad she's happy. Love's weird like that. Does it get easier? Yeah. Not better exactly, but easier. The sharp edges wear down. You learn to carry it. He bumped her shoulder gently with his. And you're stronger than you think. You'll get through this. They sat together in silence, watching distant ships navigate through the station's traffic lanes. Then Lyria spoke again, her voice barely audible. There is to be a formal betrothal banquet in 3 days. All the diplomatic corps will attend. It will be official, irrevocable. You have to serve at it? Yes. Mireth specifically assigned me. I think she knows. I think she wants me to suffer. The bitterness in Lyria's voice was new, and it worried Thomas. Then don't go. Call in sick. I'll help you fake something if you need. I cannot. Refusal would bring punishment not just to me, but to my family. Their contract. She shook her head. I will go. I will do my duty. I will smile and serve and watch him pledge himself to another. And then I will find a way to survive it. Thomas wanted to argue, wanted to find some solution, but he knew there wasn't one. Sometimes life just hurt, and all you could do was hold on. I'll be there, he said finally. Lyria looked at him in surprise. What? The banquet. I'll volunteer to be on standby for environmental support. That way, if you need a friendly face, if you need to step out for a minute, I'll be nearby. He met her eyes. You shouldn't have to go through that alone. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. You would do that? Stand in the background of a formal diplomatic event, just so I might feel less alone? Yeah, that's what friends do. She hugged him suddenly, fiercely. Thomas awkwardly patted her back, feeling the trembling in her shoulders. When she pulled away, her expression was determined. Then I will survive it. For you, for my family, for myself. I will survive it. Damn right you will. Thomas stood, offered his hand. Come on, I've got some premium chocolate in my quarters, smuggled from Earth. Let's watch bad movies on my datapad and forget about princes and politics for a few hours. What is chocolate? Oh, Lyria, your education has been severely lacking. They left the observation lounge together, Lyria's hand in his, her first genuine laugh in days echoing through the empty corridor. Behind them, unseen, a Jirani intelligence officer made notes in a data recorder. The information would reach the princess by morning, and wheels would begin turning that none of them could stop. The day of the betrothal banquet arrived with all the ceremony and tension of a diplomatic powder keg. Thomas spent the morning running unnecessary diagnostics on the banquet hall's environmental systems, memorizing exits and service corridors, positioning himself where he could see Lyria without being obvious about it. The hall itself was spectacular, a massive circular chamber with a domed ceiling that displayed real-time views of the surrounding space. Hundreds of dignitaries from dozens of species filed in, their various forms creating a tapestry of galactic diversity. At the center of it all, on a raised platform, 2 thrones waited. Thomas watched from a service alcove as the royal parties made their entrance. First came Princess Zalnara of the Jirani Collective, and Thomas had to admit Lyria was right. She was stunning. Tall even by Jirani standards, with skin that shifted between deep blue and purple depending on the light, and 4 arms that moved with liquid grace. Her eyes were compound, multifaceted, missing nothing. Then Kale entered, and Thomas saw the difference immediately. The prince wore his ceremonial robes like armor, his face a perfect mask of royal duty. But his eyes were dead, going through motions programmed since birth. The ceremony began. Thomas tuned out most of it, watching instead for Lyria. He spotted her among the serving staff, her silver-white hair bound up in the servant's traditional style, her lavender skin paler than usual. She moved through the crowd with mechanical precision, offering drinks and delicacies, her face carefully blank. Then Thomas saw Zalnara's eyes track Lyria across the room. The princess leaned toward one of her advisors, mandibles moving in quiet conversation. The advisor's gaze followed hers, landing on Lyria with predatory interest. Something was wrong. Thomas began moving through the service corridors, keeping Lyria in sight. He saw the moment everything changed. Mirith, the head of house, approached Lyria with a tray of ceremonial wine. The conversation was brief, but Thomas saw Lyria's face go white. She took the tray with shaking hands and began moving toward the royal platform, toward Kale. Thomas's comm unit buzzed. All environmental technicians, report to central monitoring. We have a critical fluctuation in the Grand Hall. He ignored it, eyes locked on Lyria. She was climbing the steps to the platform now, the tray of wine steady in her hands despite her obvious distress. Thomas saw Kale notice her, saw something flash in those golden eyes. Recognition, longing, despair. Lyria knelt before him, offering the wine according to protocol. Their hands touched briefly as he took the goblet, and Thomas saw Kale's fingers linger just a fraction too long. Zalnara saw it too. The princess stood in one fluid motion, her 4 arms spreading wide. When she spoke, her voice carried through the hall without need for amplification. Stop. The entire banquet froze. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the platform. Zalnara descended from her throne, moving with deliberate grace toward where Lyria still knelt. You, the princess said, her translated voice carrying curious inflection rather than anger. Look at me. Lyria raised her eyes slowly. Thomas saw her trembling, saw her trying to maintain composure. Zalnara studied her for a long moment. What is your name? Lyria, Your Highness. I am... A servant in my future husband's household. Yes, I know. Zalnara's compound eyes glittered. I also know that Prince Kale looked at you just now, with an expression he has never once directed toward me. An expression of genuine emotion. The hall was utterly silent. Thomas saw Kale standing rigid, his hand still gripping the wine goblet. Ambassador Thelgzaris looked stricken. Mireth's face was triumphant. This was exactly what she'd wanted. Your Highness, Kyle began, but Zalnara raised one hand. I am not finished. She turned back to Lyria. Stand, child. I will not question someone who kneels. Lyria rose on shaking legs. Zalnara circled her slowly, assessing. I have read extensively about Velthari customs, about your rigid hierarchies, your service contracts, your marriage alliances. Very similar to Zorani practice, in fact. The princess paused. But there is one significant difference. Among the Zorani, we believe that a leader who cannot acknowledge truth is no leader at all. She turned to face Kyle directly. Do you love her? The question hung in the air like a blade. Thomas saw Kyle's throat work, saw him wrestling with a lifetime of diplomatic training. Then something shifted in his expression. The mask cracked. Yes. The word was barely a whisper, but in the silence it carried. I love her. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mireth looked horrified. Ambassador Thelgzaris closed his eyes. And Lyria. Lyria looked at Kale with an expression of such naked hope and terror that Thomas felt his heart break for her. Zalnara nodded slowly. And you, servant Lyria, do you love him? Lyria's voice failed. She tried again. I am not permitted. I did not ask about permission. I asked about truth. The princess's voice was gentle now. Do you love him? Tears streamed down Lyria's face. Yes, with everything I am. Zalnara turned to address the assembled crowd. Then we have a problem. I came here to unite two peoples through marriage, to forge an alliance through the joining of royal houses. But I did not come here to bind myself to a man whose heart belongs elsewhere. Your Highness, one of the Zorani advisors stepped forward urgently. The alliance will survive without a marriage. Zalnara's voice carried absolute authority. Or it will not, and we will find another way. But I will not build the foundation of my reign on a lie. She looked back at Kyle. You are a good man, Prince Kyle. I have seen it in how your people speak of you, how they follow your lead. You would have made a dutiful husband. But I do not want duty. I want what this brave servant has found. Someone who sees me, truly sees me, and chooses me anyway. The princess moved toward the edge of the platform. The betrothal is void. The Zorani collective will seek alliance through trade agreements and mutual defense pacts instead. We will not tie our future to a marriage built on political expediency at the cost of genuine connection. The hall erupted. Advisors shouted, diplomats rushed to confer, security personnel moved to strategic positions. In the chaos, Thomas saw Kale step toward Lyria, saw her turn to him with tears still streaming. And then he saw Mireth moving, her face twisted with rage, something glinting in her hand. Thomas didn't think. He launched himself from the service alcove, shoving through the crowd. He hit Lyria from the side, knocking her away from Kyle, just as Mireth's blade carved through the air where she'd been standing. They went down in a tangle of limbs. Thomas felt something hot along his ribs, but ignored it. Security swarmed Mireth, disarming her with brutal efficiency. Above them, Kale stood frozen in shock. You stupid human, Mireth snarled as they dragged her away. You have ruined everything. She was nothing. She deserved nothing. Thomas pushed himself up, wincing. His side was bleeding, but it didn't look deep. Lyria was staring at him in horror. Thomas, you are hurt. I'm fine. He smiled at her. Just a scratch. Kyle was beside them now, dropping to his knees without regard for his ceremonial robes. His hands hovered over Thomas, unsure where to touch. You saved her. You... The prince looked up, and Thomas saw wonder in those golden eyes. Why? Because someone had to. Thomas let Lyria help him to his feet. And because she's my friend. You protect your friends. Zalnara approached, her expression unreadable. Human. You have just assaulted a member of the Velthari diplomatic corps, disrupted a formal ceremony, and bled on very expensive flooring. Thomas looked down at the puddle spreading beneath his feet. Yeah, sorry about that. Send me the cleaning bill. The princess stared at him for a long moment. Then she laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a storm. I like you, human. What is your name? Thomas Reeves, Your Highness. I fix air conditioning. Well, Thomas Reeves who fixes air conditioning. You have just changed the course of galactic politics. I hope you are prepared for the consequences. Thomas looked at Lyria, safe and alive, and staring at him like he'd hung the stars. He looked at Kale, whose mask had finally shattered, leaving only a young man in love. And he thought about his daughter back on Earth, who would grow up in a universe that was maybe, just maybe, a little bit better than the one he'd found. Yeah, he said. I think I can handle it. The aftermath was chaos measured in bureaucratic nightmares. Thomas spent 6 hours in the medical bay getting his ribs sealed and his statement recorded by 3 different security agencies. Lyria refused to leave his side, ignoring all attempts to dismiss her. Kale stationed himself outside the medical bay door, and apparently no amount of rank or protocol could move him. By the time they released Thomas, the entire station knew what had happened. The story had already mutated into a dozen different versions, some painting him as a romantic hero, others as a dangerous outsider disrupting galactic peace, a few suggesting he was a Zorani agent sent to sabotage the Alliance. He stepped out of medical bay to find a crowd. Cameras, reporters, diplomats, all shouting questions. Thomas stopped, overwhelmed, until Kale appeared beside him, Lyria on his other side. Enough, the prince said quietly, but his voice carried. Technician Reeves requires rest. All questions can be directed to the Velthari diplomatic office. They escorted him through the crowd, creating a bubble of calm around him. Thomas was acutely aware of their hands, Lyria's gripping his arm for support, Kyle's steady on his shoulder. They looked, he realized, like exactly what they were. 3 people who had survived something together. Kyle took them to his private quarters, bypassing the protests of various officials. Once inside, the prince moved immediately to his communication terminal. What are you doing? Thomas asked. Calling my grandmother, the Empress. She needs to hear this from me before the diplomatic channels mangle it beyond recognition. The holographic display shimmered, and suddenly they were looking at a Velthari woman who made even Kale look young. She was ancient, her silver-white hair now showing threads of gold, her eyes sharp despite the lines around them. Kale, I have received 17 reports in the past hour, each contradicting the last. Tell me what happened. Kale did, clearly and without embellishment. The Empress listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment. You declared your love for a servant in front of the Zorani princess. Yes, grandmother. You voided an alliance negotiated over 3 decades. Princess Zalnara voided it. I merely told the truth when asked. And this human, the Empress's eyes shifted to Thomas, threw himself in front of an assassin's blade to protect your... What is she to you, Kale? Officially. Kale's jaw tightened. I would like her to be my wife, if she will have me. Lyria gasped. Thomas felt her sway beside him and tightened his grip on her arm. The Empress's expression didn't change. A servant. No political connections. No trade value. No military advantage. No, Kyle agreed. Just someone who sees me as more than a game piece. Someone who makes me want to be better than I am. Someone I love enough to risk everything for. And you? The Empress focused on Lyria now, who looked terrified. What do you want, child? Lyria's voice was barely audible. I want to be worthy of him, Your Majesty. But I fear I never can be. Worthiness. The Empress's laugh was bitter. I married for political advantage, as did my mother before me, as did hers. We built an empire on strategic unions. And do you know what it got us? Power, influence, and a royal line so concerned with advantage that we forgot what it meant to be happy. She leaned forward, and Thomas saw something he hadn't expected: pain. My husband was a good man, a political match arranged before we met, and we were cordial, respectful. We produced heirs and managed the empire together. But love, real love. She shook her head. I spent 60 years wondering what that might feel like. Kyle stood very still. Grandmother. The Jarani alliance was important, yes, but Princess Zalnara is right. We can build it other ways. Trade, mutual defense, cultural exchange. It will take more work, more creativity, but it can be done. The Empress smiled, and it transformed her ancient face. And perhaps it is time the Velthari Empire tried something new. Perhaps it is time we led with love instead of strategy. Are you saying? I am saying marry her, you foolish boy. Marry her and be happy. Show the galaxy that strength comes in many forms, and sometimes the bravest choice is to choose joy over duty. The Empress looked at Thomas. As for you, human, you have done my family a service I cannot repay. But I can offer you this: Velthari citizenship, a position in our diplomatic corps, and the eternal gratitude of the Imperial House. Thomas blinked. Ma'am, I appreciate it, but I'm just a maintenance tech. I have a daughter back on Earth who needs me. Then bring her here. We have the finest medical facilities in the galaxy. Whatever she needs, whatever you need, it is yours. Thomas felt his throat tighten. I don't know what to say. Say yes, you idiot, Lyria whispered, and he realized she was crying again, but this time with joy. Yeah, Thomas managed. Yeah, okay. Yes. The Empress nodded in satisfaction. Excellent. Kale, begin the marriage preparations. I will handle the diplomatic fallout. And Technician Reeves, welcome to the family. We are strange and complicated, and occasionally try to stab each other, but we take care of our own. The connection cut. For a moment, the three of them just stood there, processing what had happened. Then Kyle turned to Lyria, dropped to one knee, and took her hands in his. I should do this properly. Lyria, you have been my light in the darkness, my truth in a world of lies. Will you marry me? Will you stand beside me, not as a political convenience, but as my partner, my love, my choice? Lyria pulled him to his feet. You foolish prince, of course I will. They kissed, and Thomas looked away, giving them privacy. His comm unit buzzed. A message from Earth, from his ex-wife. Sophie wanted to talk to him. He stepped out onto Kale's private balcony, overlooking the massive expanse of the station. The stars were bright beyond the viewports, and somewhere out there was Earth, was his daughter, was the life he'd left behind. Dad? Sophie's voice crackled through the speaker, and he felt his heart swell. Hey baby, how are you feeling? Good. The doctors say I'm in remission. Dad, I'm getting better. Thomas closed his eyes, let the relief wash over him. That's wonderful, Sophie. That's the best news. Mom says you've been working really hard, that you're doing important stuff. I don't know about important. I help where I can. That's what heroes do, Dad. He laughed, wiping his eyes. I'm not a hero, sweetie. I'm just your dad. Same thing to me. They talked for a while, about her treatments, her school, her friends. Thomas told her about the station, about the different aliens he'd met, carefully editing out the parts about assassination attempts and diplomatic incidents. When they finally said goodbye, he felt lighter than he had in months. Behind him, the door opened. Kyle and Lyria stepped out, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder. They looked at Thomas with matching expressions of gratitude. She is well? Kyle asked, gesturing to the comm unit. Yeah, getting better every day. Thomas smiled. Thanks to this job. Thanks to you guys, actually. The money from this contract covered her treatments. Then we are even, Lyria said softly. You gave me back my life. I am glad we could help give you yours. They stood together on the balcony, watching ships navigate between the stars. 3 people from different worlds, brought together by chance and kindness, and the refusal to accept that some things were impossible. "What happens now?" Thomas asked eventually. Kyle considered. Now? Now we build something new. A Velthari empire that values love alongside strategy. An alliance with the Jorani based on mutual respect rather than marriage contracts. A galaxy where maybe, just maybe, doing the right thing matters more than doing the expected thing. That's a big dream. Yes. Kyle smiled. But we have something our ancestors did not. We have proof that it can work. A human technician, a crown prince, and a servant girl, standing together against the weight of tradition. If we can do this, what else might be possible? Thomas thought about his daughter, healthy and laughing. He thought about Lyria, who'd found her voice and her place. He thought about Kale, who'd chosen love over duty and found that sometimes they could be the same thing. "You know what?" Thomas said. "I think maybe anything." The stars shone down on them, ancient and vast and full of possibilities. Somewhere in the station's depths, environmental processes hummed, keeping everyone alive with the simple miracle of breathable air. And in a quiet corner of the galaxy, 3 people who should never have mattered to each other rewrote the rules of what was possible. Thomas Reeves, maintenance technician, had come to fix air conditioning. Instead, he'd helped fix something much more important: the belief that kindness mattered, that love was worth fighting for, and that sometimes the smallest actions could change everything. He'd take that over a paycheck any day, though the paycheck was pretty good too.